Hello, it's Michael again. I'm here doing my review today on Bloom's Taxonomy of Cognitive Learning Objectives by Adams. There are three objectives to be taught with this review. The first is define Bloom's taxonomy, of course, understand the two important teaching contributions, and third, comprehend the importance of higher level form of learning to use in your practice. Bloom's taxonomy was published in 1956. Its main goal was to provide an educational framework or standard to write learning objectives which would foster skills and knowledge. The learners could master and demonstrate their knowledge and skills in a variety of circumstances. What is also important to note is that this knowledge and skills could be examined for the level of comprehension by observable and measurable means. There are three domains to measure learning. The first is what we are going to be studying or reviewing more in concentration today is cognitive domain, which is related to knowledge, acquiring, retaining, and use in practice. The second is psychomotor domain, which is related to physical movement and coordination. And lastly, affective domain, which is related to attitudes, emotions, and values of the student. Bloom's taxonomy has two contributions to education. The first is the teacher is taught how to write learning objectives which foster specific behavioral changes. Secondly, obligating teachers to incorporate learning objectives requiring a higher level of cognitive skills. Bloom's taxonomy educational framework, which again was published in 1956, originally had framework containing 6 categories of cognitive skills, differentiated by lower skilled activities at the base at knowledge, then ascending in complexity up to evaluation, as seen in this figure. The breakdown of these 6 categories of educational framework are as noted on this slide here. Knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. I'm going to change to this slide here to get a little more specific on this important information. To break down these 6 categories, let's start with knowledge, which is considered the basic memorizing, which can be assessed by a teacher of a student by multiple choice questions or simply definition. To make more applicable to us, I found an example of defining evidence-based medicine, or EMB, would be one way of examining this category. Second, comprehension, which is more than just simply memorizing as prior, but rather putting pieces together. So in this case, an example would be describe the steps of EMB. The next category, application. This is where a learner is able to show their knowledge, skill, or techniques through a situation of application. An example that I found which is more applicable to us is where a student is asked to perform a literature search using the medical subject heading or mesh, in which the context of using broader or narrow mesh terms is needed. In analysis, we start looking more into what we call critical thinking in an individual. This would mean evaluating a person with questions such as analyze a population health data using appropriate measures, or interpret a research findings in a scholarly journal. The next category would be synthesis. This is more of a creating a product or process for a specific situation. Ways to evaluate this form of knowledge is through asking, for an example, a question regarding a patient in regards to intervention, comprehension, and outcome, or the synonym PICO. Another way would be to craft a foreground question for both diagnosis and treatment using the same format of PICO. Lastly, evaluation, which is an important critical thinking process, which for an example, they use an instructor to reflect on the teaching session using learner feedback and assessing the results. Another example is for someone to appraise the evidence for their validity and relevance to their PICO. In 2001, there was changes in Bloom's taxonomy, which were three changes in particular. Number one, synthesis, which they changed to creating, was placed higher than evaluation. Second, they removed or transitioned from nouns to verbs, and as well as using action verbs to evaluate the level of comprehension from taught skills and information. And thirdly, there was a new dimension placed onto all six categories, in which there was four types of knowledge for each one. They are from the basic to the complex, starting with factual, which is terminology, discrete facts; conceptual, which is categories, theories; procedural, which is knowledge and technique and process. Lastly, it was metacognitive, which is really involving self-assessment, ability and knowledge of various learning skills and techniques. I wanted to review slightly the action verbs, which is recommendations to evaluate comprehension. I believe this is important because this helps a professor or a teacher evaluate comprehension of their students. As you can see on this figure, remember would be define the question, duplicate, list certain information. Apply would be execute, implement. Evaluation would be appraise, argue, defend. And lastly, create would be design, construct, some form of original work. The taxonomy has had two significant contributions to education or comprehension. The first is using taxonomy encourages instructors to think learning objectives in the behavioral terms. What will the learner do with the result of the instruction? Learning objectives are written in action verbs. Again, this is a way for the instructor to evaluate cognition of the information skills provided to the students. Second, learning objectives can be written in a higher level of cognitive skill and lead to a deeper understanding and transfer of knowledge to use in a variety of cases. The author has challenged the educators. While educators do strive to develop the learner's skills to a higher level of Bloom's taxonomy to demonstrate a mastery of cognitive processing such as critical thinking and evaluative judgments, unfortunately this is not the case in the real world. Which has been found, training programs and curricula seem to focus overwhelmingly in lower levels of taxonomy and knowledge and comprehension. Educators are encouraged to correct this deficiency and have their graduates graduate with the skill and function they deserve. Thank you very much. The next slide is my references. Again, thanks for your patience, and I'll see you the next time.